I was born into a house of magnolias and misery, though I did not understand the latter until I was old enough to see beyond the polished floors and embroidered curtains. Magnolia Grove, our family's estate, rose from the Louisiana earth like a monument to pride. Columns as tall as giants guarded its entrance, their white paint gleaming in the sun as if to blind visitors to the truth of what kept the place alive: blood, sweat, and chains. The land was rich with cotton and cane, the air thick with heat and the groans of those who bent their backs from dawn until dusk. As a boy, I believed our house was a kingdom, and my elder brother was its crowned prince. He was everything my father had wanted in a son: tall, broad, commanding, and cruel in the way that passed for strength in our world. I was the second born, the afterthought, the shadow trailing behind his golden stride. Where he raised his voice and men obeyed, I faltered. Where he lashed out, I hesitated. To him I was soft, unworthy of our name. To my father I was a disappointment, and so I learned to watch instead of speak, to listen instead of command. The enslaved people of Magnolia Grove were everywhere, though in my early years they seemed invisible to me. Ghosts moving silently with lowered eyes, their hands always busy, their voices hushed. They carried trays through the dining hall, scrubbed the floors until they shone, worked the fields in endless rows under a merciless sun. My brother never saw them as human, only as tools to be broken and replaced. But even as a boy, I saw something in them he did not: a quiet fire, a dignity that chains could not extinguish. There were times I would steal away from the house, slipping past the veranda where my brother strutted with overseers at his side. I would wander down to the slave quarters, drawn by curiosity first, then by something deeper. I remember standing outside a cabin one night, listening to a soft hymn carried on the air, voices low but strong. I did not understand the words, but I felt the ache in them, the longing that stretched beyond the walls of Magnolia Grove into some place I could not yet name. My brother caught me once. He found me near the quarters, watching a group of children play a game with stones and sticks. His hand clamped down on my shoulder, hard enough to bruise. "Don't waste your time among them," he hissed, dragging me back toward the house. "They're not your kin, nor your kind. Remember that." He said it like a command, like a law written in blood. But as he shoved me inside, I turned once more to see the children laughing, and I wondered why their joy looked purer than anything I'd known under our roof. My father's death cemented my brother's power. Magnolia Grove fell wholly into his hands, and with it, the lives of over 100 enslaved men, women, and children. He ruled like a despot, quick to whip, quicker to sell, his cruelty sharpened by the knowledge that no one dared oppose him. To the world beyond, he was a successful planter, a man of standing. To those within the plantation's walls, he was a tyrant, and I was his brother, bound by blood, yet drifting further from him with each passing year. I tell you this not to excuse myself, but to explain the path that led me to betrayal. Family is supposed to be sacred. In our world, it was everything. Blood above all. But I learned that blood can be poison and kinship a curse. Magnolia Grove was my inheritance, yet it weighed on me like a chain heavier than any iron shackle I had seen on the wrists of the enslaved. To accept it was to accept cruelty as my birthright. To reject it was to stand against my own flesh. The choice, though, did not come to me all at once. It came in whispers, in the way the enslaved glanced at me differently than they did at my brother, in the questions that kept me awake at night. Why should one brother inherit land and power, while another man's son was sold to strangers? Why should skin determine freedom, when suffering was the same for all? Magnolia Grove was built to silence such questions, but they grew inside me like weeds, breaking through the neat rows of my family's order. I remember the magnolias most of all. Their blossoms pale against the dark branches, their scent thick and sweet, almost suffocating. Guests marveled at their beauty, never noticing the fields beyond, where bent backs harvested the wealth that paid for silver spoons and polished shoes. Magnolia Grove wanted the world to look only at its flowers, never at its roots. But I knew the truth. I had walked among the roots, and I had seen how deep they ran in blood. That was my inheritance. Not the grand house, not the fields, not the promise of wealth. My true inheritance was the burden of knowing, of seeing what my brother refused to see. And one day, I would be forced to decide what to do with it. My brother Thomas was the heir Magnolia Grove had been waiting for. Father had molded him from childhood into an image of power, rigid, commanding, merciless. By the time he inherited the estate, he carried himself with a certainty that others mistook for nobility. To me, it was little more than arrogance wrapped in fine clothes. He had learned early that cruelty was a currency, and he spent it freely. I remember one morning, not long after Father's passing, when Thomas strode into the yard with a riding crop in hand. His boots were polished, his coat immaculate, and his voice carried like a whip through the damp Louisiana air. A boy had spilled a bucket of water near the steps, and Thomas, without hesitation, struck him across the face. The sound cracked like gunfire. The boy crumpled, clutching his cheek. But Thomas did not even slow his stride. He looked back only once, as if checking to see whether I had witnessed his demonstration. His eyes met mine hard as flint, daring me to object. I said nothing. I was still learning how silence could be both shield and shackle. It was not only the lash that he wielded. He broke people with words as easily as with leather. I watched him stand before a woman, her infant in her arms, as he told her she would be sold by week's end. He spoke it as casually as one might remark on the weather. She collapsed to her knees, begging, clutching at the hem of his coat, but he pushed her away with the toe of his boot. "This is business," he said flatly, before turning to me with a smirk. "You'll learn." But I did not learn. Not in the way he intended. Instead, I remembered the way that woman's cries carried across the yard long after she was dragged away. I remembered the hollow silence of her cabin the next day, the stillness of her husband staring into nothing. I learned that my brother could cut the heart out of a man without drawing a blade. Magnolia Grove thrived on such lessons. The overseers imitated Thomas's cruelty, eager to please him. The enslaved learned to bow lower, speak softer, hide their grief behind lowered lashes. And I, the younger brother, learned to carry questions I could not yet voice. Questions like, what does it mean to inherit blood soaked in misery? What does it mean to dine on meat and bread bought with another man's suffering? I kept these questions hidden, even as I found myself drifting closer to those Thomas treated as shadows. There was Caleb, broad-shouldered and quiet, who carried himself with a dignity that no lash could diminish. I saw in him the natural leader that Thomas could never be. There was Ruth, whose hymns lifted into the night like smoke, whose eyes held both sorrow and defiance. And there were the children, barefoot and curious, who laughed despite their hunger, whose games carried secrets in their songs. They became more than names and faces. They became people I could not ignore. Thomas never noticed my watching. He was too busy proving himself master. He took pride in his punishments, in the way he could summon fear with nothing more than a glance. At night, in the great dining hall, he would drink wine and boast of his authority, recounting to guests how he kept the quarters in line. They laughed with him, raising their glasses, never realizing they were toasting terror. I sat silent at those tables, my hands clenched beneath the wood, my tongue pressed between my teeth. There was one evening that remains carved into my memory. A storm had rolled in, rain lashing the windows, thunder rumbling like cannon fire. The enslaved were brought into the yard to be counted after a theft was discovered, a missing ham from the smokehouse. They stood shivering, rain soaking through their clothes, as Thomas paced before them. He struck one man at random, then another, demanding the thief confess. None did. Finally, he chose the smallest among them, a boy no older than 12, and raised his crop. I stepped forward then, my voice breaking through the storm. Enough, I said. It was the first time I had spoken against him. Thomas turned, eyes blazing, rain dripping from his brow. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then he lowered the whip, but the look he gave me was colder than the storm. Later, when we were alone, he leaned close and whispered, "You forget your place at your peril. Blood may bind us, but blood will also drown you if you betray it." I did not forget. I could not forget. His words clung to me like chains, but they also planted something else. The knowledge that I had a choice. I could remain his silent shadow, complicit in his reign, or I could step out of it and stand with those he sought to crush. That night, as the storm passed and the air grew still, I heard voices rising from the quarters, not cries of pain but songs, low and steady, carrying across the fields. They sang of deliverance, of freedom whispered like a promise. And for the first time, I felt those songs were not meant only for them. They were meant for me too. Magnolia Grove belonged to Thomas in title, but in truth, it was already divided. In the shadows of blood and bondage, another brotherhood was forming, one of trust, one of defiance, one of hope. And I knew, though I dared not admit it aloud, that my place was no longer at my brother's side, but among those who dreamed of breaking his chain. The fields of Magnolia Grove stretched so wide they seemed endless, waves of green and white under the punishing sun. To my brother they were proof of his greatness, acres upon acres bending to his will. To me, they were graves waiting to be filled, for every row of cotton was watered by sweat and sorrow. I had walked them since I was a boy, first as a curious wanderer, later as a reluctant witness. The land spoke if one listened closely, and what I heard was not prosperity but pain. By day the fields rang with the crack of overseers' voices, the whistle of whips and the dull thud of sacks being dragged through the dirt. By night, when silence fell upon the big house, the fields carried other sounds, softer, hidden, dangerous. I came to know those whispers, for they drew me out of the suffocating halls of Magnolia Grove and into the shadows. It began with Ruth. She had a way of singing when she thought no one was listening. Her voice rose like a prayer, not loud but steady, as though each word was stitched with threads of iron. I first heard her one evening while walking beyond the oak that marked the edge of the quarters. She sang low, the children pressing against her knees, their eyes bright in the firelight. The words were veiled, layered in symbols I could not untangle. But I understood enough. Freedom lay between those lines, coded and carried on the night air. I did not step into the circle that night. I stood apart, hidden by the shadows, afraid my presence would shatter something sacred. But from that distance, I saw the way Caleb leaned in, his face serious, his lips moving not in song but in instruction. I could not hear him clearly, but his hands gestured with purpose, to the fields, to the horizon, to the heavens above. I knew then that the whispers I'd half suspected were real. They were planning, dreaming, building something under the very nose of Magnolia Grove. The whispers spread like smoke. In the quiet hours when the overseers retreated and the big house feasted, the enslaved spoke in fragments. A glance exchanged over a bucket of water. A phrase slipped into a song, a gesture traced in the dirt, erased before the sun rose. I began to piece it together. They were talking of escape, of rebellion, of a life beyond these fields. At first I kept my distance. It was dangerous even to listen. If Thomas discovered I knew, he would not hesitate to strip me of blood ties and cast me into the same misery he inflicted on them. But something inside me changed with each passing night. My ears grew sharper, my feet carried me closer to their gatherings, and eventually I was no longer content to stand in the shadows. One evening I found myself sitting on the edge of a stump beneath the wide oak tree. Caleb was there, Ruth beside him, and a dozen others whose names I had only recently learned. Their eyes turned to me with suspicion at first, their voices faltering. For a moment the night held its breath. Then Ruth nodded once, and Caleb spoke. "You know why we meet," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble, "but knowing ain't the same as standing with us." I looked into his eyes, steady as the earth beneath us. "I know enough," I answered, "and I know who our enemy is. He is my brother by blood, but not by heart." There was silence, heavy and dangerous. Then Ruth began to hum again, her hymn curling into the air like smoke. Caleb studied me a long while, then finally nodded. "Words are wind," he said. "When the time comes, we'll see if your heart is fire." That night I walked back to the big house with my pulse hammering. I had crossed a threshold, no longer just a watcher. I was now a participant in something that could either redeem me or destroy me. The whispers did not stop there. They grew bolder, stronger. I began to catch them even in daylight, disguised in work songs, in the rhythm of hoes striking the soil. The fields themselves seemed to hum with secret messages. Every stalk of cotton bending under the weight of dreams too heavy to remain unspoken. Thomas, blinded by his pride, never noticed. To him the fields were orderly, controlled, silent beneath his rule. He did not hear the coded words, did not see the sparks kindling in weary eyes. He thought fear was enough to keep them bound. He never understood that fear when pressed too far turns into fury, and I became their silent conspirator, slipping bits of knowledge when I could. The timing of overseer patrols, the way the locks on the storage sheds were fastened, where weapons might be found. Each secret I shared felt like striking a match, and yet, for all the danger, I felt lighter than I ever had before. For once I was not living in my brother's shadow, nor bound by the chains of silence he had forced upon me. I was part of something larger, something righteous. Still doubt gnawed at me in the quiet hours. Could we succeed? Could 100 enslaved souls, no matter how brave, overthrow the weight of Magnolia Grove and the guns it commanded? And if we failed, what would become of them, of me? But each time I faltered. I remembered the way Ruth's voice carried through the night, the way Caleb's eyes burned with unshaken resolve, the way children laughed even as chains rattled at their feet. And I knew then even whispers could become a roar. Even fields, long soaked in blood, could birth freedom. The swamp became our sanctuary. By day, Magnolia Grove appeared unchanged. The overseers shouting, the cotton sacks swelling. Jonathan barking his orders with a voice full of arrogance. But by night the world shifted. Under the veil of darkness, we slipped into the wet heart of the cypress swamp, where the frogs croaked like a chorus, and the air hung thick with secrets. It was there that we shaped the future. One whispered vow at a time. The gatherings began small, 5 or 6 at first. Caleb brought me, introducing me not as a Toland but as a brother in spirit, one who saw chains for what they were. At first their eyes were hard, skeptical, burning with years of mistrust. I did not blame them. My bloodline was their tormentor. I expected to be tested, even despised. But then I spoke, plain, unadorned words that carried the weight of what I had witnessed. I cannot undo what my kin have done, I said, my voice low against the swamp stillness. But I can choose where I stand now, and I stand with you. It was silence that followed, the kind that judges a man more harshly than words. Then Caleb stepped forward. He laid a hand on my shoulder, calloused and scarred. Then stand, he said. But know this, if you falter, if you betray us, your brother's blood will not save you. I nodded. I did not need saving. I needed redemption. The circle grew. Word traveled through hushed songs, through shared glances at the well, through notes scrawled on scraps of cloth and hidden in bread loaves. Soon there were dozens gathering in the swamp, men hardened by the lash, women who had buried children too small to survive the toil, the old and the young alike, each one carrying a fire that Jonathan had stoked with his cruelty. One night, as the moon broke through the trees, Caleb brought forth a crude wooden cross, carved hastily from pine. He set it in the mud, and beside it a knife glinted in the lantern light. We need more than words, he said. We need an oath. One by one, each of us stepped forward. Toes said, "For." The knife was passed. Palms were cut, shallow but enough to bleed, and we pressed our hands to the cross, smearing it crimson. No overseer, no Toland command. No false preacher's sermon would bind us tighter than that blood-soaked vow. When my turn came, I did not hesitate. The sting of the cut was sharp, but fleeting. The burn of commitment lingered deeper. I swear, I said, pressing my hand to the wood, leaving my mark among theirs. By God and by my own soul, I will not turn back. Magnolia Grove will fall. The swamp echoed with murmured amens. But it was more than prayer. It was a covenant. From that night on, the planning sharpened. Caleb, Ruth, Isaac, and I became the center, the council of this hidden army. We spoke of weapons, how to fashion blades from plow parts, how to smuggle axes from the tool sheds. We spoke of signals. An owl's call, a lantern swung thrice, the beat of a drum hidden beneath hymns sung at dusk. We spoke of timing, of harvest seasons when Jonathan's men would be spread thin, of nights when drunken laughter from the big house would cover the first clash of steel. But above all, we spoke of purpose. Freedom was not enough. Jonathan and the other masters had to pay. Their power could not be allowed to endure in the soil, or it would sprout again like weeds. We would tear them out by the... I watched as the enslaved, once bowed, straightened in those meetings. Their eyes, long dulled by suffering, gleamed with a fierce new light. Children too young to fight sat listening wide-eyed, clutching their mother's skirts, already knowing they were part of something larger than fear. Yet I also knew the danger. Each oath, each plan carved us deeper into destiny. If words slipped, if one tongue faltered under the overseer's lash, Magnolia Grove would run red with our blood instead of theirs. It was a risk every one of us accepted, but it gnawed at me. I bore not only my life but their trust. Caleb was right. I would not be spared if I faltered. One night after the vows, as the others melted back into the darkness, Ruth lingered. Her eyes found mine. "Why risk yourself?" she asked. Her voice carried both suspicion and something softer. "You could walk away. You could live free, even if we die." I swallowed hard, the truth raw in my throat, because I've walked free all my life, and it was never mine to deserve. Because Jonathan is my brother by blood, but not in spirit. Because every scream I have heard on this land has chained me to your fight. There is no walking away. She studied me a long moment, then nodded, and in her nod I felt both judgment and acceptance. The swamp swallowed our words, but it held our promise. Beneath the cypress, beneath the watchful moon, 112 souls became bound together, not as slaves and not as masters, but as warriors awaiting their hour. And I, the heir of Magnolia Grove, became the traitor to my own blood. The revolt did not begin with fire or steel. It began with whispers in the fields, carried like wind among the rows of cotton. A single word passed hand to hand, folded into hymns and hidden in prayers soon. Jonathan remained blind to it all, for arrogance is the sweetest blindness. He strutted through the quarters with his riding crop, tapping against his boot, demanding greater yields, shouting at men bent double beneath the weight of cotton sacks. He did not notice the sidelong glances, the way calloused hands lingered near tools that could be turned into weapons. He thought fear still ruled Magnolia Grove. He had no idea that fear had begun to die. The first test came in the fields themselves. A wagon wheel broke under the weight of a full load, collapsing into the mud. Ordinarily, men would have scrambled to fix it, desperate to avoid the overseer's lash. But that day they froze, silent, eyes locked not on the wagon but on Caleb. He stepped forward slowly, his broad frame casting a long shadow. Instead of lifting the wheel, he looked straight at the overseer and said in a voice steady as stone, "It can wait until sundown." The words hung in the air like thunder. The overseer, red-faced and startled, reached for his whip. But before he could strike, two more men stood beside Caleb, their gazes unwavering. The field stilled. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding. I feared blood would spill then and there, that our plans would unravel too soon. He muttered something under his breath and stalked away, the whip unused. The cotton sacks returned to shoulders, but the meaning was clear. Obedience had cracked. The overseers would whisper to Jonathan of disobedience, but they would not yet grasp the depth of it. They did not see the embers stirring into flame. That night in the swamp, the story of the wagon spread like gospel. Men laughed low, their teeth flashing in the lantern light. Women hummed songs that carried new rhythm, as though the chains had loosened an inch. Ruth spoke with fire in her eyes. They tested us today, and we showed them fear no longer owns us. But Caleb cautioned, his voice like iron. It was only the first spark. If we blaze too early, we'll be crushed before the fire spreads. We must choose the night and strike so fast they have no chance to quench us. I agreed, though my blood burned with the memory of Jonathan's smirk, the whip in his hand, the cruelty he wore like perfume. Waiting was agony, but necessary. To rise too soon was to die too soon. We planned with greater urgency. The harvest season neared, when wagons would roll heavy and the fields would be alive with labor. The overseers would stretch themselves thin to wring out every ounce of work. That would be our moment. We mapped the estate in our minds, where the rifles were kept, how many overseers stood guard, when the patrols along the road changed shift. The big house, the storehouses, the stables. Every corner of Magnolia Grove was studied like scripture. Weapons were smuggled piece by piece, a file stolen from the tool shed to sharpen a plow blade into a sword. Nails hoarded until they could be bound into clubs. A rusted pistol, hidden for years, cleaned and coaxed back to life. Each addition was hidden in the swamp, buried beneath moss and roots where no white man dared to tread. And all the while, Jonathan remained blind. He raged at the overseers for every slip, every missed quota. He whipped men with more frequency, believing he was tightening control. He never realized he was driving them together, forging their hatred into steel. One evening, I stood on the veranda, listening as Jonathan drank with two neighboring planters. They laughed about their crops, about profits, about women as if they were commodities to be traded like tobacco. Then Jonathan raised his glass. To Magnolia Grove, may she outlive us all. I remember staring into that glass of bourbon umber as sunset and thinking, no, brother, she will not outlive you. The enslaved too began to change before my eyes. Where once they lowered their gaze, now they held it longer, steady and unflinching. They moved with a hidden rhythm, their steps synchronized in fields and quarters alike, as if rehearsing for the day their chains would fall. Even the children seemed to sense it, their laughter carrying sharper, brighter notes than before. And yet the danger grew sharper with it. One word, one slip of tongue, one betrayal, and Jonathan would crush it all. The swamp became both sanctuary and gallows, for we knew every plan whispered there was a noose tightening around our neck. One night, as the council gathered, Caleb spread a crude map of the estate scratched onto a board with charcoal. He pointed to the big house. When the bell tolls midnight, we strike here first. Cut off the head and the body will fall. Without Jonathan, the overseers will scatter like frightened dogs. The others nodded, their faces hard with resolve. Then all eyes turned to me. I swallowed, the weight of their trust pressing heavy on my chest. Jonathan was not just a master to me, he was my blood, my brother. To betray him was to betray my own flesh, but to remain silent was to betray all else. Sarah's broken body, Isaac's scarred back, the children who had never known a day of freedom. I placed my hand flat against the map. When the bell tolls, I said, I will be there. Jonathan will not see another dawn. A murmur of assent swept through the swamp. The oath had been sealed, the night chosen. And as I left that gathering, the cicadas shrill around me, I felt the air itself tremble with anticipation. The sparks had become flame, and soon Magnolia Grove would burn. The night before our chosen hour, I could not sleep. The walls of the big house pressed against me like a coffin, heavy with secrets. Every creak of the timbers, every rustle of wind through the magnolias seemed to whisper of the storm about to break. Jonathan slept soundly in the room across the hall, his snores thick with whiskey. He had no notion that his brother lay awake in darkness, planning his ruin. I stared at the ceiling and thought of the bond between us, fragile as glass. Blood had tied us since birth, but what is blood compared to justice? His laughter at Sarah's torment still rang in my ears. His hand, so quick to strike, so slow to show mercy, had made this rebellion not only necessary but inevitable, yet some part of me still felt the weight of betrayal. To stand against Jonathan was to stand against my father's name, against the legacy that had been bred into me. But that legacy was rotten. Magnolia Grove was a monument to cruelty, built on backs that bent and broke under its weight. To let it endure would be the greater betrayal, not of my family, but of my own soul. I rose from bed, silent as a thief, and made my way down the long hall lined with portraits. Stern faces of Toland's past glared down, their eyes oil-painted into cold judgment. They had ruled these lands for generations, feeding the soil with misery, harvesting wealth from pain. Tonight I would end their reign. I slipped out the back door into the humid night. The air smelled of river mud and magnolia bloom. The sky was veiled in clouds, the moon just a pale smear behind them. I crossed the fields barefoot, the soil still warm from the day's sun, until the ground softened into swamp. Lantern light flickered in the distance. They were waiting. When I stepped into the clearing, more than 100 faces turned toward me. Men and women, young and old, each one armed with whatever weapon they could forge or steal. Axes glinted, knives caught the lantern glow, clubs rested heavy in strong hands. Their eyes shone not with fear, but with a fierce, steady fire. Caleb stepped forward. "You came," he said, as if testing me one final time. I said I would. He studied me a moment longer, then nodded. He raised his voice so all could hear. "Tonight Magnolia Grove ends. Tonight we take back what was stolen, and we make the masters taste their own chains." A murmur of assent swept through the crowd. Some whispered prayers, some kissed the ground, some clenched fists tight as if already holding victory. Ruth came forward then, her eyes fixed on mine. She carried a long knife, its handle wrapped in cloth. "This was my father's," she said quietly. "He never lived to see freedom. I want you to carry it tonight, so when you face your brother, you'll know you do not stand alone." I took the knife, the weight of it sinking into my palm. It was more than steel. It was the burden of generations, sharpened into a single edge. "I'll carry it," I promised. The plan was simple but ruthless. 2 groups would move at once. One, led by Caleb, would seize the storehouse and stables, cutting off the overseers from horses and powder. The other, with Ruth at its head, would storm the quarters where the overseers slept. And my role was clear. I would lead the strike on the big house. Jonathan was mine. We stood together one last time in the swamp's embrace, the cypress trees looming like silent witnesses. Caleb raised his hand, and in the hush that followed, he spoke words that would stay etched in me forever. "No more chains. No more whips. Tonight we walk as men and women, not slaves. Tonight they will call our names with fear, not command." We answered with silence, for words could not carry the weight of what we bore. Only action could. The march began slow, feet pressing into mud, then onto firmer ground as the swamp gave way to the fields. The cicadas shrieked like heralds. Shadows stretched long in the lantern glow, merging us into one great shape, moving against the night. My heart pounded, not with fear but with a savage certainty. At the edge of the fields we split. Caleb clasped my shoulder, his grip firm. "Remember," he said, "cut off the head and the body dies." I nodded. Then we parted, each group slipping into the darkness, bound to its purpose. The big house loomed ahead of me, pale against the dark sky, windows glowing faintly from the lanterns Jonathan had left burning. It looked almost peaceful, as if unaware of the vengeance creeping toward it. I thought of the boy I had been, playing on that veranda, hiding beneath its railings, watching Jonathan laugh at another's suffering. How strange that the house of my childhood would become the stage for my brother's end. As we approached, I raised Ruth's knife, its edge catching a sliver of moonlight. My voice was a whisper only I could hear. For Sarah, for Isaac, for all who bled here. Behind me the others waited, crouched in the shadows, their breaths heavy with anticipation. The night was still, the kind of stillness that comes just before a storm splits the sky. I reached for the door. The hour had come. The clock in the hallway had just begun to toll midnight, when the door of the big house swung open beneath my hand. The hinges groaned, a sound I thought might rouse the dead before it woke Jonathan. The air inside was thick with the smell of whiskey and tobacco, the remnants of his nightly indulgence. I moved first, knife in hand, heart drumming like a war drum in my chest. Behind me came a dozen men and women, their faces hard, their breath shallow. We stepped across the polished floors where our footsteps seemed too loud, too bold for a house that had once silenced them. Tonight, they walked as conquerors, not as servants. The first overseer we met was slumped in a chair in the side parlor, snoring, his rifle leaning against the wall. He never opened his eyes. Caleb had been right. Take them while they sleep and they are no masters at all. One of the men with me, Isaiah, stepped forward, rope in hand. In a few swift motions, the overseer was bound and gagged, dragged into the shadows. Not a drop of blood wasted, not yet. We moved on, deeper into the house. I could hear the grandfather clock striking its chimes, each one echoing like a commandment. Strike, strike, strike. At the top of the staircase, Jonathan's door stood closed, lamplight glowing faintly from beneath it. I felt my breath catch in my throat. But before I could move, a shout rang out from the quarters beyond the fields. Ruth's group, the overseers had woken, and the clash had begun. Shots cracked across the night, dogs barked, men screamed. The house trembled with it as though Magnolia Grove itself sensed its doom. Jonathan's door flew open. He staggered out, hair disheveled, pistol already in hand. His eyes found me at once, widening with shock. "Thomas," his voice was thick with disbelief. "What in God's name?" I raised the knife, the steel catching the lamplight. The words burst from me like a flood. "In God's name? You dare? God has watched every lash you've laid, every child you've starved, every back you've broken. Tonight, brother, you answer for it." For a moment, his face twisted between fury and something like betrayal. Then rage won. He raised his pistol. The shot rang through the hall, deafening. Plaster rained down from the wall where the ball struck inches from my head. The fight had begun. I lunged, the knife flashing. He staggered backward into his chamber, overturning a chair, the pistol fumbling in his hand. We grappled, our blood so alike and yet so opposed. He cursed me, spitting words like venom. "Traitor! Bastard! You'd side with them against your own blood?" I pressed harder, teeth bared. "I stand with what's right. You've no blood in you worth defending." The knife kissed his cheek, leaving a red line. But he fought with the desperation of a man who had never known defeat. He struck me with the butt of his pistol, stars bursting behind my eyes. I reeled, nearly losing my grip. He aimed again, but this time Ruth's knife found its mark. I drove it into his shoulder, the blade sinking deep. His cry was raw, animal, not the cry of a master but of a man stripped bare of power. We crashed against the desk, papers scattering, the lamp toppling to the floor. Flames licked the carpet, the fire already spreading like judgment. He clawed at me, still fighting, still refusing to yield. In that moment I realized he would never repent, never understand. Jonathan was Magnolia Grove, and Magnolia Grove would burn with him. I shoved him back with all my strength. He stumbled, tripping over the fallen chair. The fire caught the curtains, the room blazing around us. His pistol slipped from his grasp. My knife pressed against his throat, trembling not from doubt but from the sheer force of everything behind it. Sarah's screams, Isaac's scars, every hymn sung in sorrow. And then I cut. Jonathan's eyes froze wide, his mouth opening in a final gasp. His blood spilled hot over my hand. He collapsed, a man who had believed himself untouchable, now fallen by the hand of his own brother. The air of Magnolia Grove was no more. Behind me, chaos raged. Shots still cracked outside. The overseers fought, but their surprise had been complete. I could hear Ruth shouting orders, Caleb's deep voice booming commands. The thunder of feet and the clash of steel. Magnolia Grove was alive with revolt. I stood over Jonathan's body as the flames spread higher, casting the room in furious orange. My chest heaved, but I felt no triumph, only a grim certainty. One death was not enough to balance the scales, but it was a beginning. I wiped the knife on his fine silk sheets and stepped back into the hall, where my comrades waited, eyes wide with a reflection of fire. "It's done," I said. My voice sounded strange, deeper, final. "Jonathan Toland is dead." A cheer rose, fierce and raw, shaking the rafters. But it was only the first victory. Magnolia Grove had yet to fall. The cheer that followed Jonathan's fall had barely faded when the roar of gunfire shook the windows. Magnolia Grove was awake, its overseers scrambling, its dogs unleashed, its walls trembling with the storm we had set loose. The house burned behind me, flames crawling up the drapes, smoke curling into the midnight air like a signal to the heavens. Judgment had come. We surged out of the front doors, weapons raised, meeting the chaos head-on. Ruth and Caleb's groups had already taken the yard. Fires burned in the stables. The overseer's shouts drowned beneath the cries of the enslaved, who fought with hatchets, hoes, and stolen muskets. The night sky was alive with sparks, as if even the stars had descended to bear witness. An overseer came charging toward me, rifle leveled. He was a broad man, sweat slicking his face, eyes wide with fear disguised as fury. I ducked as he fired, the shot splintering the doorframe. Before he could reload, Isaiah leapt from the shadows, swinging the butt of a hoe with bone-cracking force. The overseer dropped, his skull shattered. Isaiah looked at me, breathing hard, blood splattering his shirt. For once, he was not a man bowed in fields. He was a warrior, free and unchained. Beyond the yard, the fields seethed with movement. I saw them, men and women pouring out of the quarters. Children ushered toward the forest paths we had prepared, the old ones supported by stronger arms. They came not in fear but in defiance, voices rising in unison, a sound that split the night. It was not a hymn of sorrow but a cry of battle, of people who had tasted the air of freedom and would not let it go. One by one the overseers fell. Some fought to the last, swinging whips like swords, barking orders that no one obeyed. Others fled toward the tree line, desperate to save their hides. We did not chase everyone. Freedom was not found in slaughter alone, but in breaking their grip on us forever. Still, none who raised arms against us were spared. I caught sight of Caleb near the barn, his great frame outlined by firelight. He wrestled with an overseer twice his size. The man's whip wrapped tight around Caleb's arm. With a roar, Caleb pulled him close and drove a pitchfork through his chest. The man sagged, choking on his last breath, as Caleb wrenched the weapon free. He raised his eyes to me across the chaos, nodding once. No words were needed. Ruth was a whirlwind near the well, blade flashing in the dark. She moved with precision, every strike measured, every command clear. "Push them back, keep the children moving," she cried, her voice cutting through the gunfire. Around her, women who had once been forced to cook and clean for their masters now fought with kitchen knives and broken bottles, their hands steady, their fury unrelenting. The dogs came next, snarling, teeth bared. They had been trained to hunt us, to tear flesh from bone, to drag back the broken and the weary. But tonight, the hounds found no cowed prey. A dozen of us met them with spears and blades. The first leapt jaws wide, and I caught it midair, driving my knife up through its throat. Another lunged for Ruth, but she ducked low, slashing its belly open. Within minutes, the beasts lay still, the chains they had carried twisted and broken. The fight spilled into the fields, the cotton rows lit by fire, the night alive with the crack of muskets and the clash of steel. We pushed forward, every step tearing away the hold Magnolia Grove had on us. I saw men tear down the whipping post, dragging it into the flames. I saw women kick open the storehouse doors, seizing food that had been denied to them for years. Every act was rebellion, every act a declaration, never again. By the time the eastern sky began to pale, the battle was nearly won. The overseers lay dead or scattered, their weapons seized, their voices silenced. The house blazed like a beacon, its proud columns collapsing, its roof caving under the weight of fire. Magnolia Grove, once the pride of the Tolan name, now smoldered in ruin. I stood among my people, my clothes torn, my hands stained with blood and ash. The air was thick with smoke, but through it came the sound of voices, not wails of sorrow, but chants of victory. Men clasped hands, women embraced, children laughed through tears. For the first time, I saw them not as a broken people, but as a nation reborn in fire. But I knew as the smoke rose higher that the battle was not the end. Word would spread, the Tolan kin, the planters, the militia, they would come. We had struck a blow that would echo far beyond these fields, but it had also painted targets on our backs. Still, in that hour, none of us thought of fear. We thought only of freedom, of the chains we had shattered, of the brother I had slain, and the legacy we had destroyed. Magnolia Grove had fallen, but our story had only just begun. The sky to the east had just begun to bleed with light when silence finally fell across Magnolia Grove. The musket fire, the screams, the crashing of timber. It was all replaced by the crackle of burning wood and the steady chorus of breathing from those who still stood. My knife hung heavy at my side, sticky with blood gone cold. Around me, men and women moved among the ruins, faces streaked with soot, eyes wide with exhaustion but fierce with triumph. The big house was nothing more than a skeleton of fire and smoke. The grand columns, once a symbol of Jonathan's pride, had toppled like bones of a giant brought low. Sparks drifted into the dawn air, carried off like ashes of an old order. I watched as the roof collapsed inward with a roar, and a cheer rose up among my people. The master's throne had become his pyre. Yet victory brought no peace. The air carried with it a question heavier than chains. What now? We had struck down Jonathan, slain the overseers, and seized the land that had bound us. But freedom claimed with fire is not easily kept. We all knew the Tolans were not alone in this world. Their kin ruled other plantations. Their allies sat in courts. Their militias waited in towns not far off. By sunrise, word of our revolt would ride on the wind, and vengeance would surely follow. I climbed onto the stone steps, still hot beneath my boots, and raised my voice to the crowd. Brothers, sisters, hear me. They gathered, soot-streaked and weary, weapons clutched tight. Children clung to their mothers, wide-eyed, too young to understand the scope of what had just unfolded, yet old enough to sense the gravity. Caleb, towering above most, leaned on his bloodied pitchfork. Ruth stood with her blade at her side, her shoulders square, her eyes still burning with the fury that had carried her through the night. "We have broken Magnolia Grove," I said. "We have torn down the house that chained us, slain the masters who tormented us. But our fight does not end here. This land is soaked with their blood, and others will come to claim it. We cannot wait for their vengeance. We must choose our own path." A murmur ran through the crowd, fear mingling with determination. Some wanted to stay, to defend what we had taken. Others looked to the forest, to the swamps, to the hidden places where free communities might survive beyond the reach of whips and rifles. Caleb spoke first, his voice deep, steady. "We can't hold this ground. Not against the militia. They'll ride on us with guns and horses, and we'll be cut down before we can plant a seed. We must go where they cannot follow." A woman cried out from the back, her baby in her arms. "Then where do we go? Where can we take the little ones, the old ones, the wounded?" Ruth stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "We take to the swamps. We've mapped them in whispers for years. They say there are maroon camps there. People like us who slipped the chains and carved lives out of the mud and the tree. If we move fast, we can reach them before the planters muster their men." Her words struck like lightning. Murmurs turned to nods, nods to shouts of agreement. The swamp was no paradise, but it was refuge, it was freedom, but not all were ready to flee. Some men, their eyes still blazing with the high of victory, called for more blood. "Why stop here?" one shouted. "Let's take the next plantation, and the next after that. Let them know we will not crawl into the shadows. We will burn them all." The cry was met with cheers from some, silence from others. I felt the weight of their eyes on me, waiting for a decision. Rage burned in me still, the memory of Jonathan's last breath seared into my soul. The idea of marching from plantation to plantation, spreading fire like justice across the land, tempted me like a siren's song. But I knew the cost. The militias would come down on us like wolves, and children would fall beneath hooves and bullets before we could carve out any lasting freedom. I raised my hand for silence. "We will not be the ones who fall into madness," I said. "Tonight we showed them their power is not unbreakable. That is enough. We will not throw our children into their guns. We will live, we will endure, we will be free." The words seemed to settle them. Some still muttered, but Ruth's firm nod and Caleb's deep grunt of approval calmed the rest. We wasted no time. Bodies were gathered, both our own and theirs. We buried our dead at the edge of the fields, beneath trees where they might rest in peace, free at last from the yoke of Magnolia Grove. The overseers and Jonathan's kin were left for the fire, their ashes mingling with the ruins of the house they had worshipped. By mid-morning, we began the exodus. Bundles of food seized from the storehouse were strapped to backs. Muskets and knives were divided. Children were carried in strong arms. The elders supported as best we could. We turned our backs on the smoking ruin, walking not as slaves but as fugitives, as warriors, as a people with no master but our will to survive. I looked back once, just once. The fields stretched golden in the dawn light, smoke curling into the sky, the charred skeleton of the house looming black against the horizon. Magnolia Grove was gone, but its ghost would follow us, and so would the vengeance of those who claimed its legacy. I whispered to myself, so low no one else could hear, "Let them come. We are no longer theirs to break." The sun climbed higher, hot and merciless, but we did not pause. Every hour brought us closer to the hunters who would surely be loosed upon our trail. We crossed the cotton fields for the last time, a line of more than 100 men, women, and children. From a distance, it might have looked like a funeral procession, yet the air that carried us was not grief. It was resolve. The swamp lay ahead like a dark promise, its cypress trees rising from the water like the bones of ancient giants. Spanish moss draped over their limbs, gray and heavy, hiding what lurked beneath. The ground was treacherous, a shifting quilt of mud, roots, and shadow. But it was here, in this forbidding place that freedom might take root. Ruth walked at the front, her blade still stained, her chin high. Caleb flanked the rear, his eyes scanning the horizon for riders. I kept to the center where the children clustered, small hands clutching their mothers, their eyes wide with fear and wonder. We entered the swamp at noon. The air grew thick, heavy with the stench of mud and stagnant water. Insects swarmed in clouds, stinging our skin, buzzing in our ears. The ground sucked at our feet, swallowing each step with a wet slurp. But we pressed on, using paths whispered from one generation to the next, secret trails the enslaved had mapped in stolen hours, etched into memory, never written down. The swamp tested us at once. A child slipped from his mother's grasp, tumbling into water that came alive with ripples. Before I could shout, Caleb dove in, his massive hands pulling the boy free as a gator's tail thrashed just beyond reach. He set the child back into his mother's arms, water streaming from his shoulders. His only words were a grunt, "Stay close." The incident shook us, but it also reminded us that the swamp was not just refuge, it was trial. Every step forward would demand vigilance, strength, and unity. By evening, we found a patch of higher ground where the cypress roots tangled into a natural barrier. There we rested, if it could be called rest. We shared what food we had, biting into hard bread and dried meat, while children sipped from gourds filled to the last plantation well. The smoke of Magnolia Grove still smeared the horizon behind us, a reminder of what we had done and what might yet follow. As night fell, I sat with Ruth and Caleb apart from the others. The swamp sang with frogs and crickets, their chorus both eerie and soothing. Fireflies flickered between the trees, tiny lights dancing in the dark. "They'll be hunting us already," Caleb said, his voice low. "Dogs, trackers, riders, they'll not let this go." Ruth nodded, "Which is why we must vanish, no straight paths, no fires too high. We move by night where we can, rest where even the dogs can't scent us. If the maroons are real, we'll find them. If not," she let the thought hang unfinished. I looked out over the people we led. Faces I had known since childhood, faces beaten, scarred, yet lit now with something fierce and unyielding. If not, we build something ourselves. We didn't burn Magnolia Grove just to die in a swamp. We will make a life here, a hidden one perhaps, but ours. The words steadied me, though doubt gnawed at the edges. Could more than 100 survive in a place that swallowed men whole? Could we defend ourselves when the planters came with guns and chains? Yet to admit such doubts aloud would be to plant fear where only hope could keep us moving. That night, I dreamed of Jonathan. His face loomed out of the smoke, blood streaking his mouth, his eyes burning with hatred even in death. "You think you've won," he rasped. "They'll come for you, they'll come for them, and when they do, your blade won't save you." I woke with a start, sweat chilling my skin despite the swamp's heat. At dawn, we moved again. The children cried from weariness, their feet blistered, but their mothers hushed them, whispering songs of old promises, songs that had once been laments, now reshaped as hymns of survival. Men carried the weakest on their backs, women shared the burden of food and arms. Every step deeper into the swamp was a step further from chains. We crossed a channel waist deep, the current tugging at our legs. On the far side, the ground rose again, and there, carved into a cypress, we found a sign. Not words, but marks, slashes and symbols, the kind whispered about in the quarters. The maroons had left them, a secret language to guide those fleeing. Hope surged like fire in my chest. "They're real," Ruth whispered, her eyes shining. "They're close." We pressed on, following the markings deeper into the mire, hearts quickened by the promise that freedom was not only a dream, but perhaps a community waiting for us. But as the day wore on, the sound of distant hounds carried faintly through the swamp. The hunters were coming. The first howl rolled through the swamp like a curse. Long, low, hungry. Every head turned, every breath froze. We had all heard dogs before. At auctions, on patrols, in midnight hunts. But in the swamp their voices seemed to echo from every direction, bouncing off the cypress trunks, making it impossible to know where they lurked. Children began to whimper. Mothers clutched them tighter. Caleb muttered under his breath, his jaw tight. "They've loosed the hounds." Ruth did not waste time. She barked orders like a captain at sea. "Move, quiet as you can, keep low. Stay close to the water if you must. Dogs lose scent in it." Her eyes scanned the tangled growth, already looking for high ground to lead the group through. We pressed on, the swamp pressing back. Mud clung to our legs like shackles. Insects bit at our skin. Branches tore at our clothes. Still we moved. Behind us, the baying of hounds grew sharper, joined by the crack of riders' whips and the clatter of hooves on distant dry ground. The hunters were not far. I carried little Sarah on my shoulders, her legs too short for the march. Her small hands gripped my hair, her breath warm on my neck. She whispered, "Uncle Thomas, are they coming for us?" "Yes," I said, though my voice was calm, steady. A lie made truth by the way I forced it. "But they won't find us. Not here." Her silence after that was heavier than her weight. By midday, the first clash came. A dog burst from the undergrowth, black and frothing, its teeth bared. It lunged at a boy who screamed, stumbling into the mud. Before the hound could close its jaws, Caleb caught it mid-leap, wrapping his massive arms around its body. With a twist and a grunt, he snapped its neck. The crack echoed like gunfire. Caleb dropped the limp body into the muck, sweat shining on his brow. "One down," he growled, but others followed. 2 more hounds broke through, their handlers crashing after them, rifles ready. Ruth met them with a scream, slashing her blade in a wide arc. One dog fell, its belly spilling open. The second latched onto Isaiah's arm, dragging him down. He shouted in pain, blood pouring as he tried to wrench it free. I lunged, my knife plunging into the beast's ribs again and again until its jaws slackened. Isaiah's arm was torn, but he still stood, teeth gritted, eyes burning with fury. He seized the rifle from the nearest handler, clubbing him across the skull with the butt until bone gave way. The other handler raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Ruth's blade slit his throat. Blood sprayed the reeds. His body fell into the water, drifting away in silence. We had won the moment, but victory was costly. Isaiah's arm hung useless, his face pale. The children wept, their cries carrying through the swamp like signals to every hunter within miles. "Move," Ruth ordered again. "Don't let this be where we fall." We pushed deeper, following the old carvings on the trees. Each mark pulled us forward, promising refuge, promising others like us. But the hunters pressed harder too. We heard their shouts, "Drive them forward, smoke them out." And soon the scent of fire drifted in, sharp and choking. They were burning parts of the swamp to flush us from hiding. The smoke curled low, thick as fog. Coughs broke out among us, and the children began to stumble. I knew we could not outrun both dogs and fire. We needed more than flight. We needed to turn the swamp itself into our shield. At the next clearing, I called Caleb and Ruth to me. "We can't just keep running. They'll drive us straight into the flames. We fight here, not all of us, the strong ones. The rest slip through while the hunters bleed." Ruth's eyes narrowed. She understood at once. An ambush. Caleb's lips twisted into something between a grimace and a smile. "Then let's give them a night they'll not forget. We chose a bend where the water ran deep, the ground soft and treacherous. We planted sharpened stakes just beneath the surface, hidden by mud. Branches were piled high to block the clearer paths. And there we waited, dozen of us, weapons in hand, hearts hammering in the silence between hound howls. When the hunters came, they came loud, confident, their torches glowing through the haze. The dogs lunged forward, dragging men with rifles at their heels. They shouted and cursed, laughing as though already victorious. And then the swamp swallowed them. The first rider's horse stumbled into the mire, impaled on the stakes. The beast screamed, throwing its rider into the water. Men splashed after him, only to sink waist-deep in muck that clung like chains. From the shadows we struck. Ruth's blade flashed across one throat. Caleb's pitchfork drove into another chest. I leapt forward, dragging a man under the water, my knife finding the soft place beneath his ribs. His struggles stilled, his blood clouding the swamp around us. Gunfire erupted, torches fell, smoke thickened. The hunters shouted in panic as the swamp turned against them. One by one they fell, by steel, by water, by fear. When silence came again, broken only by the croak of frogs, half their number lay dead. The rest fled into the trees, their hounds gone, their torches drowned. We had won a battle, but not the war. The swamp had hidden us, sheltered us, but it had also marked us. Blood on the water would draw more, and worse before long. Still, as we regrouped and pressed deeper into the mire, following the signs toward the maroons, hope flared once more. We had survived their first onslaught, and survival for us was its own kind of victory. We moved on through the swamp in silence, broken only by the squelch of mud beneath our feet, and the coughs of the children still choking on smoke. The signs carved into the trees became more frequent. Slashes, spirals, symbols I did not fully know but felt deep in my bones. They were not warnings. They were invitations. By dusk we came to an island of cypress roots rising above the mire, a place that seemed almost deliberate, as if chosen long ago. Smoke drifted from hidden fires, faint but unmistakable. My chest tightened. Were we too late, or had we finally found them? Ruth raised her hand, signaling us to halt. She crouched, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, scanning the shadows. Caleb gripped his pitchfork, muttering, "Feels like eyes on us." He was right. From the trees above, figures emerged like wraiths, their bodies painted with mud and ash, their eyes glinting in the fading light. Bows were drawn, blades gleamed. For an instant, I thought the swamp had conjured spirits to punish us for daring to trespass. Then a voice rang out, deep and measured. "Who comes into our ground?" A man stepped forward, tall and wiry, his skin dark, his hair bound tight with strips of cloth. Scars lined his arms, scars not from whips but from battles. He carried no musket, only a long spear carved from cypress, its tip honed to a deadly point. His gaze swept over our weary band, lingering on the children, the wounded, the soot-stained faces. I stepped forward, my heart hammering. "We are fugitives from Magnolia Grove. We burned it to the ground. Jonathan Toland lies dead by my hand. We seek refuge." Murmurs rippled among the hidden warriors. The tall man's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his stern face. "You slew a master." I nodded. "And his overseers besides, but his kin will come. The hunters already followed us into the swamp. We fought them back, but more will come." "If you are Maroons, then you know the weight of that truth." Silence followed, heavy as the dusk. At last the man lowered his spear. "I am Okoro. My people have lived free in this swamp for 20 years. We do not welcome strangers lightly, for they bring the news to our door. But you are many, too many to leave wandering." A woman stepped from behind him, her eyes sharp, her shoulders draped with beads of bone. "They are hunted," she said. "Their blood will draw riders and fire. To take them in is to invite death." The crowd of Maroons muttered agreement. I could feel the weight of their suspicion pressing down on me. Ruth stepped forward then, her voice clear, fierce. "We are not asking to be carried. We fought to free ourselves. We killed to earn this march. If you doubt our strength, ask the swamp. It still drinks the blood of those we cut down. We do not come as beggars. We come as kin if you will have us." Caleb rumbled. "And if you will not, then we'll carve our own place in the mire. We won't crawl back to chains." The Maroons studied us, their faces unreadable in the gathering dark. Okoro's eyes narrowed, his silence stretched. Then he lifted his spear and struck it against the root beneath him. "Enough? Let them rest. If the riders come, we will decide then whether they are burden or brother." A path opened among the trees. Slowly we were led deeper into the hidden camp. The place was a marvel of defiance. Huts woven of reeds and branches rose from patches of dry ground. Fires burned low, hidden beneath coverings to keep smoke from rising. Fish hung drying on lines strung between trees. Weapons were stacked neatly, spears, bows, blades forged in secret. And people, men, women, children, moved among it all, living not in fear but in quiet, hard-won freedom. Our own people stared wide-eyed. For years we had whispered of such places, barely daring to believe. And here it was, breathing alive. The children were given food, fish stew, warm and rich. The wounded were tended by women who carried bundles of herbs and spoke in low, soothing tones. For the first time since the revolt, I saw shoulders loosen, saw lips curve into something almost like smiles, but peace was brittle. I could feel the eyes of the Maroons on us, weighing us. Were we kin, or were we doom at their doorstep? That night I sat by a low fire with Okoro. His gaze held mine, sharp as a blade. "You killed your master, you burned his house. That much is truth. But do you know what it means now? You did not just free yourselves. You declared war." I said nothing at first. The fire crackled, the swamp hummed with night sounds. Finally I answered, "Then let war come. We will not kneel again." Okoro studied me long, then gave a slow nod. "We shall see." The swamp was never truly silent. Frogs croaked, insects hummed, owls called from the shadows. Yet that night, beneath the canopy of cypress, there was another sound, a wrong sound. The faint baying of hounds carried on the wind. I jolted awake. Around me, others stirred, their bodies tense, their eyes wide. Ruth was already up, bow in hand, her gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the fire's edge. Caleb's knuckles whitened on his axe. The Maroons moved like shadows, quick and quiet, gathering their weapons. Okoro crouched low, his spear glinting faintly. His face betrayed no fear, only the sharp focus of a hunter. He turned to me and said, "Lo, they come." The words hit like a hammer. We had known it was only a matter of time. Magnolia Grove's kin would not let the revolt fade into the swamp without retribution. Jonathan's blood would not rest on my hands alone. It would cry out to every planter within 100 miles. Okoro signaled, and the Maroons vanished into the brush, becoming one with the trees and water. "Stay where you are," hissed the bone-draped woman, the one they called Amar. "If you bring their fire to us, we will cut you down before they ever arrive." Her words stung, but I did not argue. She had reason enough to mistrust us. Still, as I listened to the hounds grow nearer, The truth seared in me. We were bound now, whether by choice or by doom. If we fell, they would fall too. The first light of dawn seeped through the trees as the sound of splashing hooves and baying hounds grew loud. Then came voices, white men shouting to one another, muskets clattering. They were in the swamp, though not yet on us. Ruth pressed close to me, whispering, "They've got trackers with them. The dogs'll catch our scent easy in this muck." I swallowed hard. The children huddled close, trembling, their eyes darting to me, waiting for some promise I could not give. Caleb growled, "We can't just sit. If we wait, they'll surround us like hogs penned for slaughter." Before I could speak, Okoro appeared, silent as the mist. "Your kin ride hard. More than 20 men with dogs. They will find this place by sundown." Amma's eyes flashed as she stepped forward. "Then we must drive them out before they bring the fire to us." A murmur rose among the Maroons, some agreeing, others wary. They were not of one mind. Okoro raised his hand for silence, his gaze never leaving me. "Tell me, Rebel, will your people fight, or will you cower behind ours?" Every eye turned to me then, and the weight of it nearly crushed me. I looked at my people, tired, battered, hungry. But I also saw the fire still in them. The same fire that had carried us through the burning fields, through the swamp, to this hidden camp. "We will fight," I said, my voice steady. "We spilled blood to win freedom. We will not hand it back at the first barking of dogs." Ruth's hand brushed mine, her eyes fierce, affirming. Caleb cracked his knuckles, grinning grimly. "Let 'em come." Okoro gave a slow nod, though suspicion still flickered in his eyes. "Then we fight as one. But hear me. If even one of you falters, if even one of you betrays us, I will strike you down myself." The day was spent in tense preparation. The Maroons showed us traps hidden in the water, pits lined with sharpened stakes, snares disguised with reeds, false trails laid to mislead dogs. We helped fortify the camp, weaving branches, sharpening weapons, steadying our resolve. Children were hidden deeper in the swamp with the elders, guarded by a few swift runners. The rest of us readied ourselves for the storm. As the sun sank low, the sounds grew nearer. Dogs howling, men cursing, gunmetal clanking. Smoke rose faintly where torches were carried, staining the horizon red. Night came, and with it the riders. We heard them before we saw them, horses crashing through the mire, dogs straining at their leashes. Lanterns swung in the dark, throwing wild shadows across the trees. Their voices carried thick with fury. "There," a man shouted. "Tracks! Fresh, they're close." The Maroons crouched in silence, bows drawn, spears ready. My people clutched their blades, their pitchforks, their stolen muskets. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then came the first scream. One of the dogs impaled on a hidden stake. Another yelped as a snare snapped, dragging it under the mire. The riders cursed, their torches flaring as they fumbled in the muck. Okoro raised his hand. "Now," he whispered. The swamp erupted. Arrows hissed from the trees, striking riders from their saddles. Spears thrust from the shadows. The cries of men and beasts mingled, high and ragged. Muskets boomed in reply, their flashes lighting the night. Horses reared, dogs snapped. Chaos tore through the mire. I was in it then, shoulder to shoulder with Caleb, Ruth at my flank. We struck from the shadows, retreating, striking again, leading them deeper, deeper into the traps the Maroons had sown. The hunters had come with fire in their hearts, but the swamp swallowed fire whole. The swamp boiled with fire and screams. Lanterns swung wild in the riders' hands, casting broken light across the trees. But the shadows were alive with us, shapes darting, blades flashing, arrows whistling through the dark. The first rider I faced lunged with his musket raised as a club. I ducked, the wood splitting the air above my skull. My knife found his belly. His roar gurgled into silence as he toppled into the mire, swallowed whole. "Press them!" Okoro's voice cut through the din. The Maroons struck like the swamp itself, silent, merciless, vanishing before steel could touch them. Spears pierced horseflesh, sending beasts rearing and riders crashing into black water. Dogs yelped, dragged beneath by snares that snapped their bones. But the hunters were many, and they fought with the desperation of men who knew they carried their master's vengeance on their backs. Muskets boomed, each blast tearing the night apart. I saw one of our own, young Thomas, fall screaming, his chest torn open. Ruth's arrow flew in reply, striking the shooter clean in the throat. The man clawed at his neck, choking on his own blood, before tumbling into the mud. Caleb roared like a bear, swinging his axe in great arc. One rider tried to level a pistol at him, but Caleb cleaved down, spitting man and weapon alike. Blood sprayed hot across my cheek. Caleb only grinned, his teeth white in the firelight, but we were being pressed. For every hunter that fell, another seemed to surge forward. Their dogs, though bloodied, lunged through the reeds, their howls chilling. A pistol cracked near my ear. the shot grazing my shoulder and tearing fire across my flesh. I stumbled, but Ruth pulled me up before the next blow could come. "Stay on your feet," she hissed. "The swamp eats the weak first." Through the chaos, I saw Okoro locked in combat with a rider nearly twice his size. The man swung a saber. Each strike meant to cleave him in two. Okoro ducked, rolled, then drove his spear up under the rider's rib. The horse screamed, the man toppled, and Okoro stood over him, pulling the blade from the muck and hurling it aside. Still, the riders pushed deeper. Their leader, a man with a crimson sash knotted across his chest, shouted above the din, "Cut them down. Burn it all if you must, but bring me their heads." He spurred his horse forward, torch high, intent on setting the huts aflame. The thought of the children hidden deeper within struck terror through me. Without thinking, I hurled myself at him. The impact knocked me against his horse's flank. The beast screamed, rearing, and I clawed at the rider's sash, dragging him from the saddle. We crashed into the mire, thrashing his torch sputtering into the mud. He slammed his fist into my face, the taste of iron flooding my mouth. His other hand found a knife, and suddenly it was pressed against my throat. "You'll die like the dog you are," he spat. Before he could drive the blade home, Ruth's arrow took him clean through the eye. His body stiffened, then went limp, sliding off me into the black water. I gasped, clutching my throat, staring up at her. She only nodded once, her bow already drawn again. The battle raged on. Arrows hissed, blades clashed, and the swamp drank greedily of the blood spilled into its roots. Yet for every enemy that fell, we too lost another. I saw Amma, the bone-draped woman, fall with a musket ball in her chest. She smiled as she sank into the mire, as though she had always known this was how she would leave the world. The riders began to falter. Their dogs lay broken, their torches smothered, their numbers thinning. The swamp had turned traitor on them, hiding us, devouring them. Panic flickered in their eyes. "Hold the line," one cried, but his voice cracked with fear. Okoro lifted his bloodied spear, roaring, "This is our ground, none leave it alive." We surged forward, striking as one. Caleb's axe split helmets. Ruth's arrows found throats, my knife carved in desperate arcs. The Maroons fought like storm and fire, their voices rising in war cries that echoed through the cypress. The crimson-sashed riders' men began to break. One dropped his musket and fled, only to stumble into a pit of stakes. Another tried to spur his horse back the way they'd come. But the beast reared, panicked, and threw him into the mire where hands dragged him under. The swamp itself seemed to rise against them. Lanterns sputtered, the air thick with smoke and mist, and the cries of dying men drowned beneath the croak of frogs and the rush of dark water. At last silence fell. Only the rasp of breath and the groans of the wounded remained. The riders were broken, their bodies strewn among the roots and reeds. Horses thrashed weakly in the muck before falling still. The swamp had swallowed them whole. We stood bloodied, ragged but alive. Okoro planted his spear in the mud, his chest heaving. He looked to me, his eyes sharp, unreadable. "You said you would fight," he said. "And you did." I wiped the blood from my face, my hand shaking. "This is only the beginning. They will come again, more stronger. Magnolia Grove's kin will not rest until we are ash." The swamp was silent, save for the groan of the wounded. I knew the truth of my words. This victory was fire in our veins, but it was not freedom. It was a promise of war still to come. When the last rider's scream was swallowed by the swamp, a strange silence followed. It wasn't peace. It was the hollow quiet of exhaustion, of men and women who had given everything just to stand upright in the mud. Smoke still curled from shattered torches, and the water ran dark with blood, but the hunters were no more. I sank to my knees, the muck cool against my skin. Around me, our people gathered in broken clusters. Some cradled wounds, others clutched the hands of the dying. Caleb leaned heavy on his axe, his chest heaving like a bellows, eyes still wild. Ruth moved from one wounded soul to the next, binding gashes with torn cloth, whispering soft words that steadied hands and stilled sobs. The Maroons too gathered their fallen. They did not wail or keen. They stood in grim silence, honoring their dead with bowed heads and steady eyes. Amma's body was carried to a raised root, her beads clattering softly as they laid her down. One of the younger women wept openly, but Okoro placed a hand on her shoulder. "She died as she lived, unbent," he said. I looked at him then, the weight of what we'd done heavy on me. "We brought this upon you," I said hoarsely. "If not for us, they would not have come." Okoro's gaze was hard, unreadable. For a moment I feared his wrath would break at last. But then he shook his head. "Do not mistake it. They would have come one day, with or without you. Freedom draws fire, always has, always will." His words burned truth into me. We had not doomed them. We had only hastened what was already written in the marrow of this land. As the night waned, we buried our dead in the swamp, the roots and waters becoming their grave markers. The maroons sang low as they worked, a song without words, just a steady hum that seemed older than any tongue I knew. We joined them not knowing the melody but knowing the grief. By dawn, the camp was quiet again. The smoke of burned torches drifted thin, and the sun broke through the cypress canopy, spilling pale gold across the water. It was the first light we had seen since the revolt that did not feel like the end of the world. But choice lay before us now, sharper than any blade. We could stay here, hidden with the maroons, living in the shadow of the swamp. Or we could march on, deeper into the unknown, carrying our fire into the wide world beyond. Caleb's voice rumbled as he broke the silence. We can't keep running. Sooner or later, more will come. 10, 20, 100. The swamp will hold us for a time, but not forever. Ruth looked to me, her eyes searching. What do you say? Do we hide, or do we carry the fight beyond the roots? I felt every eye on me. My people scarred but unbroken, the maroons wary but watching, the weight of command pressed like iron. I stood, my body aching, my blood still drying on my skin. We began with fire, I said. We began with steel. We showed them Magnolia Grove could fall, that chains can break, that even a master can bleed. If we stay here, we live in the shadows, waiting for the next storm. If we march, we carry the storm with us. A murmur rippled through the crowd, fear and hope mingling. Caleb's grin was weary but fierce. Ruth's hand found mine, warm and steady. Okoro studied me long, then nodded once, as if weighing my soul and finding it worthy. Storm or shadow, he said, you must choose by dawn. My people will not force your path, but know this, freedom is never given. It is taken, again and again, until the last chain is broken. His words echoed in me. The swamp still hummed with death, but in its roots I felt something greater, a promise that our blood was not spilled in vain. As the sun rose higher, we gathered together, scarred and weary, but alive. We had struck back, we had survived, and now the world itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what we would do next. Would we vanish into the cypress, ghosts of rebellion whispered about in secret for generations, or would we march on, carrying the fire of Magnolia Grove into every plantation that still dared to hold our kin in chains? I did not yet know, but I knew this. We were no longer slaves. We were no longer fugitives. We were something the masters feared more than anything. We were free, and we were many. The swamp would keep our secrets. The blood of our dead would feed its roots. And from that soil something new had risen, something no chain could bind. Whether we vanished or marched on, the truth would spread. Jonathan Toland's house lay in ashes, his body rotting in the mire, and with him fell the lie that slavery was unbreakable. Freedom had spoken, and its voice would not be silenced.